Welcome, everyone, to this Thursday talk. We're really excited to have Dr. Prince Charles Dickinson, a ConnexUs Influencer for Change. And if you don't know about the Influencer for Change program, head over to ConnexUs to see all of the amazing projects that have been done. Prince Charles is joining us today to talk about peace bubbles in Nigeria. And today's Thursday talk is part of the Evidence and Impact Summit. So I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Emily Long, to tell us a bit more.
Awesome. Thanks, Xander. And hi, everyone. I'm Emily, as Xander said, from the ConnexUs team. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for participating in the Evidence and Impact Summit this week. If you're not aware, we have been showcasing practitioners who are making a positive impact in their communities, with work ranging from youth peace and security to evaluation and learning. Of course, that features Prince Charles himself. We've had over 200 registered participants, 3,800 summit visitors, and over 15,000 visits to the summit homepage this week, which we're all very excited about. So if you haven't already, please register for the summit so that you receive our culminating report tomorrow and our digest next week. And to connect directly with other participants and or share work of your own, please be sure to check out our ongoing discussion, which Xander will drop in the chat along with the registration link. Lastly, we appreciate your support and are really excited for the collaboration opportunities this creates. So thanks all and take care, and look forward to hearing from you, Dr. Prince Charles.
All right, good afternoon from this part of the globe and from wherever you're listening to. It's quite a honor and a pleasure to be sharing thoughts. I like to use the phrase sharing and learning. So it's all about sharing and learning, sharing our collective experiences and seeing where we can also learn from other people and the work that we do. So I'll talk us through as slowly as I can through about 3 phases of what the peace bubble is all about. And I take those phases first by putting Nigeria in context for our listeners to understand the Nigerian context, and also then the work that Peacebuilders do across Nigeria, and then specifically in Plateau State, non-central Nigeria, which is where our organization's operational base is. So in the last 1-2 decades, in fact, since the advent of democratic governance in Nigeria, the level of peacefulness for this country, Africa's most Black population, has greatly diminished. It's been largely plagued with insecurity. A country that's got 36 states, and whatever dimensions you're looking at, it's been a consistent downward trajectory when it comes to safety, cohesion, diversity, interfaith conversation. There's been a high sense of intolerance. Quite interestingly, wherever the conversation is, whichever narrative you're listening to, the country isn't as unsafe as some of the indices and some of the reports. Has been that safer state. In the north, you've had places like Jigawa. You've had places like Bauchi, which has been relatively safe. And in recent times, if not for the herdsman clashes, banditry in places like Niger State, these are places that have been relatively safe. Gombe State, in the first quarter of 2022, has been the safest state in Nigeria. And quite interestingly, that's a state in the northern part of the country. And so when you look at it, there are dynamics, lots of dynamics. And you look at this dynamics, the Igbos in the southeast have been recently accused of either a mastermind in the killings or outrightly killing northerners as a result of separatist movements. In other parts of the country, we have groups like the AfrEA Youth Consultative Forum that have also asked the Southeasterners, the ethnic group, the Igbos, to leave the north or face some form of violence. And the Yorubas also were given 72 hours notice to leave the north, with boycotts in terms of food items from south to north. You find out that it's a country that has probably almost reached its wits end in terms of managing its security apparatus. And with all this, you see a country that its security architecture has almost failed. But in spite of that, you find out that we can say categorically that peace workers, community workers, in terms of the peace structure has been able to hold the country to the best of its ability. So The peace bubbles itself comes from the COVID. It's a term that originated from the COVID-19 pandemic, where we looked at small local organizations and the work they do with small local community in maintaining cohesion. And this is coming against the backdrop of the analysis I gave about how insecurity has slowly but gradually deconstructed the country and given a weak system, as it were. Having said that, so we looked at local community organizations and how they've been able to build this peace bubbles where people could stay and protect themselves irrespective of their ethnic differences, religious differences. These support bubbles have been united by common interest. And in this case, the interest is the need for collective safety. And away from the COVID-19 pandemic, the idea was for them to have collective safety against the usual, what we call the usual suspects. And in this case, political violence, in this case, community violence as a result of ethnic, intra-ethnic, interfaith squabbles, all held grievances across communities. So civil societies and non-governmental organizations, in their efforts to strengthen these ungoverned spaces, have largely relied on this peace bubbles. Define them. I mean, how do we know these peace bubbles? So we've looked at basically where work is done by local organizations, local community-based organizations, where they've been able to create an absence of violence or the fear of violence, and alongside a conflict zone. Like when you look at Gombe State, which I gave as an example, Gombe State has a proximity to the war theater that Borno State has become in the from Adamawa State. Yet it's been able to create a sense of security. And this is not just about Gombe State. It's about other states where these have evolved in many parts, where there's a capacity of this community, either by a conscious use of early warning and early response systems and holding themselves together at the heart of a country, a nation that seems to be disintegrating at all parts. And for these community bubbles, peace bubbles, it's quite interesting to see the intersection of the dynamics of peace, the perception, conflict, economy, political, ethnic, and faith indices. In practical terms, what we've found out in evaluation is that a group can actually be in a peace bubble because they share the same faith. So you have a bubble that is largely a Christian bubble of their political affiliation. So people in that community tend to have the same voting parity, the same political ideology. It also could be a function of their history, or again, a shared aim of building community cohesion, which has been there over decades amongst people in that community. We also found out in our evaluation that education and poverty also plays a very conscious role in our community state, particularly where we work, but across the nation, because where we've seen that there's a conscious effort at putting basic social infrastructure, those community members, such as, for example, early warning, early response, or where you have good public health system, or where you have good public or even private school facility, you find out that the level of conflict significantly of the functional peace bubbles. So what these local organizations have done is to strengthen community cohesion at this point. And what they've done is spread them, duplicate them. So if you have a community peace bubble in location A, there's a conscious effort at replicating it that work across various organizations have been able to, as a result of effective work, learning from errors and mistakes over the years, have complemented the efforts of those communities by working to establish social and community cohesion, making sure that localized early warning and response mechanisms are functional in these communities. Now, coming down specifically to Plateau State, North Central Nigeria, we worked across with 3 organizations and developed 2 functional peace bubbles in what we refer to as city centers with proximity to where we thought were red flag zones. And these red flag zones are places where at every interval, there is an escalation of intense violence, either as a result of religion, faith, ethnicity, or politics, or natural resource dynamics. And we discovered that over a period of time, the work this organization did in a place called Cornish Soldier and another place called Dadinkoa, both communities that have not seen conflict and violence across either religious or ethnic lines, had shown that these peace bubbles can work. And one of the things we found out was there was a need for consistency. It wasn't just a one-off 6 months, 8 months projects. No, these were projects that simply jumped into one another at the expiration of one project. Another organization simply actually built on the successes and the learned lessons of another organization. On several occasions, we must be very frank, the elasticity of these bubbles have been tested. And that's the exciting part of the development of these peace bubbles. So we've not just dwelled on the fact that, oh, these are peace bubbles, and so we just leave them. No, they've been tested over and over. So, for example, in areas where we see that the elasticity of the peace construct is across religious lines, what we've simply done, like in Corner Soldier, is to develop a Sports for Peace activity, which we called the Music Plus Sports Equal Peace Initiative, which was funded by the Peace Direct's Local Action Fund. The idea behind that intervention was to bring Christians and Muslims to be part of soccer teams, which we call football in this part. And we didn't give them names of their vicinities or their locals, but we decided to give them names of that were cross thematic titles: hope, forgiveness, unity. These were the names we gave to each team to be able to build social cohesion at a point where that peace bubble was being tested. And so we found out that another thing we did beyond the sports itself, there were the intention or the intentionality of targeting economic livelihoods of these community. Now, the sports program, which we hosted with our local partner, was to help these communities bond by more than just one factor. So it wasn't just about just having to play football or soccer. We infused monthly peace and dialogue forums, which took into cognizance and brought together stakeholders to discuss early warning signs in those areas as frequent as once every month and subsequently twice every month, and also to bring in community and traditional leaders. Now, here is where it takes a dimension of its own. In part of our communities in many parts of Nigeria, and in this parts particularly, sometimes you find out that the traditional leaders double as religious leaders and also double as cultural leaders in a way. So you find out that there is a duopoly. Sometimes a leader sits on a tripod of several titles. And so it makes the work sometimes complex and sometimes easy. So sometimes you want to have a conversation, an intervention across faith lines. And then you find out that those faith leaders are also custodians of the traditional system in those communities. So it's about the expertise, the knowledge of the local organization. And one of the things we've done is to use a localized system. Why this is important for us is over the years and in recent times, there's been that conversation around localized peace building, the relationship between INGOs and local partners in understanding the dynamics of conflicts. So that has worked for us because we tend to have conversations with our partners where they are flexible and we want to say, this is what works. So beyond what we refer to as workshop entrepreneurs, where the peace spectrum is about workshops and workshops, we've looked at new initiatives, games, sports, communication for development, theater, women and peace security engagement, youth engagement in the security spectrum in getting peace to work in these bubbles. Now, what we've also done is we are looking at how do we make these bubbles bigger? Because again, when we say peace bubbles, I'm sure someone wants to find out what are the population sizes of these communities. So can a bubble, if a bubble is say 5,000 per community, 3,000 community, How do we build on that numbers? How do we replicate from community level to local government level to regional level, state level? How do we do that? And this is where, of course, bigger interventions are needed. Replicating at a big spectrum is also considered. But what we believe is that as much as we try to replicate, and when we use the word replicate, put it in perspective, you have a country where, say, for example, 776 local governments. So if we pick local government by local government, we're able to replicate looking at the red zones where we have conflagrations, and we're able to impact by duplicating what works in peace bubbles that share proximity with those conflict areas. And we believe that by doing that, these peace bubbles simply grow bigger and they have ripple effects far and wide. In total, we've been able to map out 17, now 18 peace bubbles. We've worked with about 5 CSOs and NGOs in those bubbles. ConnexUs also helped us during the heat of COVID to be able to also bring tech and to manage rumor, which also is within the ambits of misinformation and disinformation in an age of tech, which has considerably heightened tensions across the country. We've worked with ConnexUs as donor partner, Search for Common Ground, Peace Direct, the HWPL, Creed in London, and a few other development partners in multiplying and duplicating this peace bubbles. I'll take a breather for now and let this long conversation sink in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prince Charles. That's a lot to sit with, to think about, and really interesting. As people think of their questions, their comments, their reflections, one thing that I'm curious about, Prince Charles, is sort of the reaction or the impression that people living in these peace bubbles. Has it been mixed? Have people been really excited? Is there skepticism? Sort of curious about their general reactions.
Yeah, it's created a sense of excitement. And I tell you that in Plateau State, North Central Nigeria, you have a lad who's 19 years old. And at 19, he's never had an association of some sort of integration with a Muslim if he's a Christian. We have Muslims who are almost 20 years and haven't had any form of integration with the Christian community. So we've had divided cities put in perspective. So one side of the community is one faith, the other side. And so there is that big wall. And so one of the things these peace bubbles have done is to bring both sides of the divide, not just to what we used to refer to as neutral venue, no, but being able to get into each other's communities and exist, pretty much coexist and share thoughts. And in our peace bubbles conversations in those communities, you can see the excitement. Why do I say the excitement? You see people who have loads and loads of questions about other faiths based on their perception, shared learning, or things they used to think. In one of our interventions in a particular community, a young Christian boy who was Catholic said he didn't know that Muslims also use the beads that Catholics use. He was saying to his father, "How come Muslims are using? Do they pray to the same?" So you're pretty much shocked at the level of ignorance, for lack of a better word. And so and you can see the excitement on their faces because these were things until now they didn't know as a result of the violence that was prevalent before now.
Thank you. Jared says, thank you for sharing your work with us, Dr. Dickson. Could you share how you think the upcoming elections in Nigeria will affect the peace bubbles?
Already, the good thing about the peace bubbles is that we're already seeing an elasticity of the peace bubbles, and it's not exactly new. And the reason why we say it's not exactly new is that we can understand the perspective to which elections are conducted in the Nigerian context. So what we've done is sizable amount of the interventions moving forward have actually dwelt on voters' education, their electoral processes. Campaigns are going on around and across conversations centered on the thematic area of hate speech, inflammatory and dangerous speeches around the electoral period. So there's been there's been a fixation of all interventions geared towards that in the peace bubbles. So we're trying to make them understand that there's this local parlance that says election not war, election no be fight, which loosely translates to the fact that the elections don't have to be war. And of course, the good thing about the bubbles is those in these bubbles are guiding their communities. So they're really, really conscious of the effect that the elections can have, and they're asking for interventions to help them build their electoral intervention knowledge at this point. Of course, the good thing about the elections in Nigeria is that it provides ample time for interventions to help sequel to the elections proper.
I'd be really curious to sit into those conversations. It must be fascinating within the peace bubbles, especially leading up to the elections. We have another question from Helly. Thank you a lot for the presentation. Peace bubbles are wonderful. One question: how can you rate the effectiveness of peace bubbles comparing to other means to teach peace in communities?
One of the things we've done is for the peace bubbles, we've given ownership. So the community own it, like we said, more like the COVID-19 bubble. So they own it, they know what the issues are, they know what the early warning signs are, they know what the contestations in every community is. And so that has given it a semblance of a very strong localization. Unlike what used to be the practice before now, where by and large programs were pretty much, in terms of programming, programs were just lumped on CSOs. Maybe they worked in some other clime. There are no considerations of whether they're going to work here or not. In as much as it's a peace intervention, you just carried it out. The donor provided the funds. But the idea for the peace bubbles are strictly localization. The interventions, the programs are all very local in nature. And the languaging, the participation, the resource that comes in, the resource persons, the expertise are all within those local communities.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. This is amazing and inspiring. I was wondering if also you have any initiative where you use technology and social media, as we have a current initiative to showcase work of peace building organization across the world that use technology and social media. I would be interested to know if you use any of these tools. Thank you so much.
Yes, new social media handles are very, very active. And beyond its activities, one of the things we've done for the local community system in these bubbles is also to enhance their local knowledge in the use of technology. For example, in the early warning, early response system, how community women at very local level can use mobile phones to be part of a reporting system. We conducted a project in both Benue, and then we replicated it through the social influencer project of ConnexUs, where WhatsApp groups are empowered to be able to act as an EWER and also economic livelihood projects using technology. And then we've also received part training from Build Up Peace, who's a partner with us in helping some of these peace bubbles to understand the role that social media can play. And why this is also important for us is that in our evolving nature in most of these local communities, one thing we've discovered is there's a whole lot of, like I said earlier, misinformation, disinformation, rumors that trigger a whole lot of conflict. So it's things like learning how to fight fake news in the peace spectrum, discovering deep fakes, even at that local level, things we've been able to pass on to this peace bubbles.
Thank you. Victor, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, Dr. Dickson, sir. I was wondering if there are, say, certain topics that, prove contentious, or maybe they tend to, say, threaten the peace within the peace bubbles. Like, say, when you are discussing some of these topics, would you say there are certain things that, that tend to cause more friction? And then I would like to know if generally, when people participate in these peace bubbles, are they generally come with the, the disposition of, okay, we just want this thing to work out, or do you tend to find more hostile approach?
The experiences vary. Like our organization, interestingly, bears a local name, Tattaaunawa, which loosely means the dialogue at the round table. And we give the first impression is it's not a win-win. And it's about, like our motto says, voices, connection, and action. First of all, we want people to talk. And in them talking, they're going to say very tough stuff, the hard stuff. That it's not like a political conversation where there are no-go areas. No, we allow them talk. We allow them vent. In some of our conversations, we have psychosocial experts that deal with trauma. We have religious experts in terms of interfaith dialogue. So they sit to talk about it. And the idea is to talk and talk and talk and talk again. If we don't get it right the first time, there's nothing that says we can't try again. And there is no imposition. And I think this is understandable given the spectrum of the peace building development sector where every report and output input is all get towards successes. No, for us, the idea between shared learning and sharing is we're not afraid to fail. So on a lighter note, we've seen where someone picks up a chair at an intervention and says, no, 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 that's not correct. He didn't like the way he was addressed. I'll give you a very quick one. I'm already smiling. We had an intervention, an interfaith intervention in a bubble, and the Christians were complaining that the Muslims had prayed 3 times already, and it was disrupting the program, you know. And the Muslims were like, but they had to pray 5 times. And then the Christians were like, okay, tell us why you had to pray 5 times. And then one of the Christians now said, okay, well, listen. Now, that wasn't a comfortable conversation, but the idea was to listen and learn. Because like what we've discovered is there's a lot of information out there in some of the, say, for example, in this case, an interfaith conflict that you can't verify. These are information that have become almost naturally true to everybody when it's not true. So you're asking a fellow Muslim, is it true that when I kill, I get a virgin? And they're like, no, it's not anywhere. So there's a lot of ignorance. And so if you don't have conversations around the tough topics, then you probably wouldn't be achieving much. So yes, we do. We do. And like I said, these are conversations that are pushed by the community themselves. So they are not just led to it.
I would just like to ask how can somebody say participate? How can someone help? Like an individual, I'm not an organization or anything. How can I help participate, encourage or support the peace bubbles? What are the available opportunities?
Now, what we do is we often tell people that, of course, the peace building community is one large community that has become so much about donor funding and donors. So what we normally do is we say to people, you don't have to be that big donor. Sometimes you're providing, say, for example, technology. And how do you provide technology? In a community, all you could probably do is provide data for that community to have an effective early warning, early response system. In a community, all we're saying is, could you help us get books for children to be in school? And then use the conflict to the barest minimum. That's what we're asking for, So, and then through our social handles, through our website, you're able to look at what we do and say, okay, I can be part of this. For example, we have movie showings where in our last movie showings, we brought a community together and we showed them Hotel Rwanda. And after that, we had a conversation around the implication of ethnic hate. Now, for example, in that intervention, all we probably needed was just logistics, a piece of cake, a drink for all the community. So we try to do it at that very local level. So we're not asking for $50 billion or $1 million. No, not at all. Not at all.
Thank you, Victor and Dr. Prince Charles. Wani, I'll give you the last question if you'd like to unmute. Wani in South Sudan.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, for the presentation. I think this is a very, creative idea in terms of what to peace building work. Where I look at it, I don't know if there are any maybe reports. I mean, what I could get from your side, because maybe certain things can work here in South Sudan. Yeah, otherwise, I'm really happy to see this working out in Nigeria. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Actually, we have two more questions in the chat. So I think we'll have them both ask questions, and then if you can put the answer together to both of them. Afifa, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you. This is really, really interesting. I have a question about the role of women in these peace bubbles. I've just been looking at the pictures and been noticing that it's been primarily sort of a male space, at least from the pictures themselves. And I understand the gender dynamics in certain, certain areas in Nigeria. But I wanted to see if you could talk more about women and women's leadership and how are women centered in these conversations, especially in conversations that are not, that are not focused on issues that are traditionally, and I'm doing air quotes right now, women's issues, also air quotes, because there's always that tendency to be like, oh, you want to talk about health, or you want to talk about family planning, or you want to talk about, schooling. Those are issues that women can, quote unquote, be involved in versus the hard questions, the political issues, the ethnic issues. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that. Thank you.
Yeah, what we've done, and a very quick apologies about the slides you get to see. It wasn't intentional. We're currently working with the UN Women on the phase 2 of the program on women, peace, and security in Nigeria. And what we've done is to scale that and put it at the local level into these community bubbles. And quite interestingly, we've also delved into what you consider and maybe consider the hard questions. So in the last in fact, 2-3 years, we've had, for the first time in a place called Bauchi, a state called Bauchi, we have a woman in the traditional council. That couldn't have happened. That wouldn't have happened. And even when it happened, it was a silent voice. So what we've now done is to have a woman part of that traditional council. That's an improvement. That has also seen a replication in Plateau State, precisely about 3 cases now. Now, at the heart of the economic sustainable livelihood programs, interestingly, our women, our men are hardly part of the livelihood programs, because we found out in these bubbles, the women play a very strong role, different from the men, because the youths that are often than not the instruments of this conflict tend to actually listen to either their mothers, their aunties. So the women play a strong role. So what we've done is to create a small spectrum of WPS that has CSOs, NGOs within the women peace security architecture, working solely in that dynamics. And when we say community peace bubbles, we also try to understand the level of economic holes in these communities. And we've come to discover that women actually have a whole lot of economic strength from their petty trade. And so there's no how, to a large extent, that these bubbles are successful without the input of those women. In fact, in Bay of Zaman Lafia, it was only an all-women peace intervention group used to build the bubbles.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's very, very helpful.
Thank you for the question and all of the questions that everybody has submitted throughout the session. Prince Charles, I'll give you the last word, but there are a few more questions in the chat about how marginalized communities are able to enter and participate the peace bubbles. So if you could touch on that and then sort of give us your parting thoughts.
What we've done, increasingly, marginalized communities are often they're not almost not thought about. From experience, we've seen that programs are created, for example, not just speaking about the community bubbles, but beyond that, where people have to be reminded that there are people with disabilities to take into cognizance. You just create a program and nobody's talking about it. In these communities, as a result of conflict centered around natural resources, we're forced to, as a matter of policy, to discuss, say, for example, equitable access to affordable clean energy, sustainable food systems, resilience to climate change and disasters, inclusive and equitable human development across the displaced societies, these displaced communities, these displaced sections of the public in these peace bubbles. And the reason we do that is, again, these bubbles don't exist outside either normative policy and institutional frameworks. So you can create the best framework to have these peace bubbles work. But if they don't sit within the ambits of adequate laws and policies in place, either at state level or national level, to, for example, maybe promote gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, the peace bubbles ultimately collapses because you don't have such legal and policy framework, or there are gaps in those policy and legal frameworks. So it's pretty much very important. And then programmatic actions also plays a very strong role. You know, we look at what are the key challenges and opportunities in, say, for example, promoting women's effective participation in leadership and politics and governance in the community spaces. And like one of the questions asked, where's the place of a woman? So if you're creating a community leadership system where there are no women, then you don't actually have the buy-in of that gender. And how do you bridge these gaps in terms of there's a fallout of conflict? So there's a lot of sensitivity in the conversation, and we keep wanting to learn. We're not afraid to fail. These are ongoing conversations and ongoing learning. And in the context of this conversation, it's about learning also for us.
Perfect. Thank you, Prince Charles Dickinson, for especially ending on a note about shared learning as we sit on a ConnexUs Thursday talk in the midst of the Evidence and Impact Summit. It was really great to have you. And we look forward to continuing to engage, to further Thursday talks, to continuing this conversation and learning more about these projects. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you very much, Xander. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.